Now,
After Masa, I have to see why we're wandering
Right.
Jews.
before we actually, we'll be turning very soon to Devarim, but beforehand, let's briefly go back to page 852, just to understand how we will guide us into Parshas Devarim. 852. Okay, so keep one hand. We're blessed with two. One in Parshas Devarim, and you're going to turn to page 852. We're at the end of Parashat Chukat. The nation of Israel is trying to make their cut to the west. They're in the wilderness. They're south of Israel. The wilderness curves to the east of Israel. There are nations settled in modern-day Jordan by the Jordan River. These are nations, if they are in the Middle East, they obviously are not going to like the Jewish people, are not going to appreciate the Jewish message, and therefore they will not cooperate with Klal Yisrael. So the nation of Israel, which needs to make its way towards the Jordan River, begins a process of communication. And that is what we're going to turn to on page 852, just to introduce what's really occurring here. So on page 852, Vaishlach Yisrael Malachim el Sichon. So the children of Israel send a messenger, messages, or a messenger, an emissary, to the king of the Amori, by the name of Sichon. And the request is as follows. Ebra be'artzecha, we have a need. We want to go ahead and pass through your land, but we're going to remain on the highway. No trespassing. We will indeed remain because our goal is just to get through. Lo niteh b'sadeh v'kerem, lo nishteh me'beher. Worry not. Your precious resources are not going to be impacted by our journey. Somehow we have the ability as a nation to survive, which is unheard of, right? A nation traveling through another nation and not asking for any natural resources because they have what they need. So Sichon obviously in verse 23 says absolutely not, and he gathers his nation to go out to battle against the people of Israel. The rest of the story on page 24 is that the Israelites are successful in battle and they conquer his land from Arnon until Yabok, Bnei Ammon. Now, they settle in cities. So verse 25 on page 854 is a very significant verse because this is the first time in our history that as a nation we are actually conquering a city, and it becomes our city. That's what happens because the east side of the Jordan River is really part of Eretz Yisrael. During the First Temple period, we had tribes, 2.5 tribes that settled in that region. So this process, which is a very significant one and really a very exciting one, starts on verse 25.
Does that mean if they had let them go through, they wouldn't have conquered it?
They wouldn't have. That's what happens.
Then that wouldn't
Nations
have
of
been
Israel.
then that would not have been part of it.
Correct. When it comes to the rest of Israel, when it comes to Israel proper, on the west side of the Jordan River, Yehoshua gave options to the locals and told them, listen, this is our land. It was promised to us, and if we are on the right spiritual level, it's ours. You have 3 options. You could either remain there. In other words, we actually give a right to non-Jews to remain in the land of Israel, but they're going to follow our guidelines. In other words, number 1 is you have to be ethical. You're going to follow the Noahide laws. Number 2, you're not going to have a national identity. You're going to have an identity that relates to your kfar, to your village, and perhaps to your city, but not more. That's really the proper way of dealing with the Palestinians, is to recognize them as dwellers of villages, not more. In other words, they have rights, they should be supplied, their streets should be cleaned, and they should be taken care of and treated with dignity, but their identity ends with their village. And it's not because we're cruel. They don't really care about the other person. If you are in a village in somewhere in the Galil, you do not care. If you're an Arab, you do not care. And this is something that I remember in in chat about a year ago. They had a speaker, an Israeli Arab speaker that came to talk to the kids, and he got up there. He was a fine individual, complained a little bit, not terribly, about the Israelis, but all the pictures that he showed were about his village and his lemon tree. And when you come, he'll make you lemon juice, right? And he tells a picture about his village. And the kids were a bit disappointed because they wanted to hear more of the politics of things and his attitude towards the peace process. And when I was trying to explain that this is exactly the proper picture of how you are supposed to look at them and their attitude. They care about their village, and that's it. There is no such thing as a national identity, right? And this is actually proven in the Torah itself. If you look at Ishmael, remember him? Okay, you know his descendants, right? We have some tzaras with them a little bit. We sure do. So now, in Ishmael itself, when it talks about their settlements, it's very fascinating because first the Torah tells us that al pnei kol echav shachen, that the descendants of Ishmael settled, lishkon, they dwelled. But then afterwards, after the passing of Avraham Avinu, at the end of Parashat Chayei Sarah, when it's talking about the Ishmaelim, it tells us that they, indeed, you want to know what happened with them? Al pnei kol echav nafal. In other words, the same idea is spelled out that they settled, but the Torah does not use the word dwell, not shachan, but rather the word was nafal. They fell. Now, what's the difference between the two? So, if let's say I have a few cards, right? I'll take out my cards. I'm not advertising for any company. I'm just showing you a few cards here, okay? Now, these 3 cards are going to be placed here on this box, and I'm going to put one here, and one here. And as you can tell, I did a magnificent job, more or less, of keeping them touching. You can see that there's an order there. There's an order, right, more or less. It's a bit shaky, but there's an order. Here, when there is order, it means that this one is positioned here, this one's positioned there, this one's positioned in the middle. So if you envision this as cities, there was city planning that was done here. If there is city planning, there's a relationship between these cards, right? It dwells. You hear the idea, because there's a relationship. So if the one in the middle is where the cows are, it's easier for them to have a milk distribution that works well. That is a shachan. You with me? Now, on the other hand, if I go like that, that's a nafal. When the cards fall, there's no relationship. So each card has its own identity, correct? But if they fall, there's no relationship between them. And it works as follows. When Avraham Avinu is alive, Ishmael still has values. And when it has values, when you teach your kids values, they have an identity. In other words, it's something that it brings them together, right? They're like a family. We are a family, Klal Yisrael. Why? We have a national identity. In the days of the temple was the temple. Jews, what brought Jews together, and we were one nation, every single Jew cared about the temple, the Beit HaMikdash. So we were one nation. We lost it. It was devastating. We have lost our national identity. Comes Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and teaches the nation, guess what? We have something that keeps us together even without our Beit HaMikdash, which is Torah. Incredible. And the accomplishment of the man is supernatural. That we are alive today is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Give him credit for who we are today. So we have a national identity. So we are always, even when we are in exile, we are a nation that is shachen, that we dwell because we have a relationship. And by the way, when it comes to business, a lot of the fact that we were able as Jews, from Venice to Amsterdam to Hamburg, to go ahead and be successful in commerce was because you arrive in a new place. What's the first thing you do? You look for the Jews. You go to the shtibel, you interact with them. So we are a nation that always shachen. Now, the Ishmaelim, you know who they are. The Ishmaelim, while Avraham Avinu is alive, they have values. And therefore, when they dwelled in those tents, there was a relationship. There was something that brought them together. The teachings of Avraham Avinu, the values of Avraham Avinu. With his passing, when you would go to an area where there were tents of Ishmaelim, and there were a few tribes within that family, there was no relationship between them because there was no longer a common, because when you talk about self-determination, they were not determined to do anything as a nation as a whole. So there was no relationship between them. They were like the cards that fell on the table, where they have no longer anything that brings them together. Today, the only thing that does bring these villages together is there's hatred. Now, not all of them, obviously, but it's being pumped in by Abbas and by the Palestinians Authority and by the Hamas. But the reality is that they have identity as cities, not as a nation. And therefore they are a nation of nafal. So you see what the Torah is telling you. There's a switch that's occurred. We have every responsibility in the world to treat them with dignity, but as long as they don't have, they don't have some kind of core that brings them together. And listen, this is someone, I know politically there are different views here. We tried Oslo. We tried giving them a national identity. You like it or you didn't like it. I know many of you here did not like it already in 93. There are others that would say, that believed wait and see. The option was given to them and they failed. That's a reality that failed. And the truth is that this seems to be indicated in this text. When we entered Eretz Yisrael, when we interacted with those 7 nations, which Torah tells us they were very, very corrupt. These were nations that part of their religious services was to burn people. Okay, that's what they did. Gamet bneihem v'et bnotehem. Children, they would be more than happy to offer them as a korban. But the Torah tells us don't kill them out. That's not what you should do. That's only in a situation where you have no choice. Ideally, you let them live in Israel, but they should accept your values. If they're not willing to do that, give them the option of leaving, right? You transfer them to different regions, and some nations did. If, on the other hand, they were not willing to accept your values and not willing to transfer, then you have no choice, but you have to go to war because it's your home. This is what we are told, but that only relates to Eretz Yisrael proper. When it comes to the east side of the Jordan River, that was an area that all we wanted was to pass through. We were attacked, so then we already settled there to some extent, which is occurring right here in this verse. And once we settled, it became our land, and that's why we have the story of the tribes of Reuven, Gad, and half of Menashe that make a request to remain there permanently. But now, what I want to focus on is the name of the city, the first city that becomes the beginning of our process of settling. So here we go. Verse 25, Vaikach Yisrael et kol harim ha'ele, vayishav Yisrael b'chol harei ha'amorim. This is verse 25. And what is the name of the city? Right? Cheshbon. Okay, nice name? The first Jews were actuaries. Cheshbon.
Firstborn?
Actuaries, they're good with their numbers, or maybe accountants, I'm sorry. Okay. So now, the significance of the name, leave it up to the Talmud. The rabbis share with us the following. This is not a reading of Pshat, but it's a reading where there is a message there. And they say the following, that you should know that a person, to be a successful Jew, has to do a lot of math. You have to do a lot of math as a good Jew. Why? Why do you have to do a lot of math to be successful, not just in financial matters, but in spiritual matters? If, let's say, you have a situation that you have a great an opportunity to meet someone for a golf game, and if you meet him, you know very well that business will be good, right? On the golf course, they say that a lot of deals are done on golf courses. Is that true? I've never played it. It's true.
I heard it's true. I don't
You're
know.
true.
What kind of deal did we make up?
Okay. Avi does it on a tennis court. So you hear this opportunity. You could go ahead and meet this wealthy individual. It's going to be good for business. You're seeing the dollars already, and you have to wait and be in contact with a friend who knows a friend of that individual. Eventually says, no problem. This coming Saturday at 11 a.m., you're going to be meeting him there. So here you go ahead, you sit down and you say to yourself, oh boy, this is the only opportunity I have. I could be gaining here financially tens of thousands of dollars. Maybe the rabbi could find some kind of heter to go ahead and hit it with the shinui maybe.
Rabbi.
What?
Ivanka's rabbi.
B'nai Yeruv, perhaps.
Ivanka's rabbi.
Okay, so I'm not going to respond. I have to be careful. Let me record it here. So give me some kind of, But on the other hand, I sit down and I think to myself, you know what? Look at what Shabbos is. Shabbos has kept not just me and my family alive. It's kept my whole faith alive. It's kept the Jewish people alive spiritually. Those who kept Shabbos, right? They are around today. Families that ignored it, we know what happened. So you start making a cheshbon. So the Talmud tells us to be a successful Jew, do a lot of cheshbon. Look at the mitzvah, weigh the mitzvah, and weigh how much you're going to gain if you ignore it. Yes, you might gain a little bit in this world, but there's something much bigger, we all know. Right? There's a bigger picture. There is eternity we're dealing with. Live a life of cheshbon. This is what the Talmud uses, and it derives it from the series of verses that are presented here as they address cheshbon. Because if you look carefully in the next verse, in verse 27, for example, Al ken yamru hamoshlim. Therefore, this is a simple reading. Therefore, regarding this, the poets used to say, Bau cheshbon tibaneh v'tikoneh ner cheshbon. So the Talmud says hamoshlim. The moshlim are those who are moshel, those who have control over their evil inclination, are the people that make a cheshbon. This is a rabbinic reading. Fine, nice, a nice message. I think it's an important one, and one that we could use. But the question is, why specifically this city becomes a symbol for this concept of weighing the pros and the cons, the benefit of ignoring the word vis-a-vis taking it into consideration. So that's the question we're going to address, and that's all an introduction to Parshas Devarim, page 938. So now we are ready. So now, commentators note, Parashat Chumash Devarim. Let me repeat that. Chumash Devarim is actually different than the earlier Chumashim. When they say the following, the first 4 books are actually the words of God. They're spoken by Moshe, but when he was inspired to spell out those specific words. That relates to the first 4 books. Other prophets, by the way, when we say that the words of Yirmiyah, Yeshayahu, Yecheskel, when we describe their words, we are not saying in any way that these are the words of God. Absolutely not. They are the words of a person who had a vision. And our tradition teaches us that these visions were not because they were smoking something, but rather these are actual visions that they had of a spiritual realm. They have a vision, they describe it to us. And we are inspired by those words because they are words of a very spiritual being seeing something that we could not. Fine, so you see a difference there between Moshe's words, which are basically, in the words of the rabbis, Shechina medaberet mitoch grono. It is as if God spoke from his throat, versus the other prophets. However, although that is true regarding Moshe, and when it comes to the first 4 books, Bereshit, Shmot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, the book of Devarim is different. It is actually Moshe Rabbeinu choosing his words to describe his message. So it's a very different book. So this is a book that is somewhere in between the Moshe style of transmission and the style of the other prophets. And the Talmud actually uses this idea to study laws, because if Moshe placed one piece of information next to the other, there must be a reason for it. Meaning we are analyzing more Moshe. So if you want to study, if you have an expertise in linguistics and you want to really understand the psychology of Moshe Rabbeinu, turn not to the first 4 books, study Devarim well. This is what we are told. In addition, where is the book of Devarim taking place? So look at verse 1. Ela Dvarim asher diber Moshe el kol Yisrael. These are the words that Moshe spoke to all of Israel. Where were they? Be'ever HaYarden. They were on the other side of the Jordan River, not in Eretz Yisrael. And where were they? Well, they were spread out. They were no longer a nation in the wilderness, but rather they are already settled in cities. Like Cheshbon, there were cities. They are interacting with a civilization. And the area was between the wilderness, between the Arava, across the Suk, between Paran and Tofel, Lavan, Chatzerot, Dizahav. So although the rabbis have different readings regarding these words, what the simple text seems to indicate, this is a nation that's not in the wilderness, they're somewhere in between. So just as the message of this book is somewhere in between the regular style of the Torah and the words of the prophets, the state of the nation is different. Moshe is now addressing a nation that is somewhere in between a settled nation in Eretz Yisrael and a nation traveling in the desert. You hear the idea. This is a state of in between. And also, by the way, what did they eat throughout the years in the wilderness? Man. When they settled here, they are interacting, they enter into marketplaces. Remember, they stumbled with the daughters of the Moabites and the Midianites? They couldn't have such a challenge in the wilderness. There were no, the Meidalach were not there. Where did they have this challenge? When they're settled here, they're starting to settle with the civilization. So their prophet changes, is like adjusting himself into more of a future type of prophet. Their interactions are different. His message is different. The food is different, right? So you could say that this is like training wheels. Remember the kids with their bicycles? How you first buy them a bike with training wheels. They get on, and there are different types of kids. There are kids that put on the training wheels, and within 2-3 days, they say, I'm ready, take them off. And then you have kids that are happy with the training wheels for the next 4 or 5 years. We've had, both. Different kids are very comfortable. It looks well, it looks cool. They can say, I have my own bike already. And then you have kids that have the personality of arguing that the two are insignificant, so I already know how to ride a bike. And this is a period of training wheels for our nation. Because to enter into Eretz Yisrael, interact with the marketplace, with civilization. Remember, this is a spoiled nation. They get their food from heaven, their water from the Be'er Miriam. According to tradition, their clothes, they didn't have to do clothes shopping, right? It was before the Jew discovered Bloomingdale's and Nordstrom. This is a nation that is taken care of on a supernatural level. In Eretz Yisrael, you're interacting with a society, right? It's like, the story of the kid that had difficulty with pronouncing a few letters. So he comes during the 9 days. He comes home and he tells his parents that he learned in school or in camp that the Lomans were very bad to the Jews. Right? The Lomans. He meant the Romans were very bad to the Jew, but it came out the Lomans, and the father really agreed with that. They've been very bad to the credit card and to the Jews. Now, so a nation needs adjustment. So where is this taking place? On the east side of the Jordan River. And suddenly, the Jew has to start making a cheshbon. You know that when you have the opportunity in studying in a kollel, right? So you're newlywed, you go ahead and what do? Right? You're married, you have, it's a wonderful environment at home. But then, what do the whole day? You sit on a bench and you study Talmud, right? It's great. It's amazing, right? You have an opportunity to just detach yourself, not be concerned about anything. The burden is the parents. That is a kollel. But then, right, eventually, you have to start making decisions. And decisions have to be made if you start working. And then you know that you're supposed to now, but you have to start balancing things. I have to go ahead and supply things or bring in a paycheck. But at the same time, I still want to study because this is my spiritual identity. So you have to start making a cheshbon. And then one evening you're sitting and learning a little bit with a chavruta, but then there's a need at home because the wife is a bit overwhelmed. You have to make a cheshbon here. What's more important, your own spiritual development or the environment at home? These are decisions. It's hard to make decisions. It's hard to make decisions in life. It's much easier if we don't have to make decisions. But that's part of our responsibility. God wants us to settle the land of Israel, make decisions, be mature, right? That's what our existence is all about. Therefore, the first city that they settle when they arrive in the beginning of their process of settling is the city of Cheshbon. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of what's taking place right here. Now, the nation of Israel is going to get a little bit rebuked here, by the way, by Moshe. Moshe, this is the last month of his life. And he has to set in motion a nation that's going to live in Israel with values, right, with justice, with charity, with humility. And he knows very well that the Jewish people could be difficult at times. And he knows their history, and he dealt with them day in, day out. So this is a leader that loves us. The leader who loves his people and who is really concerned about them, at times is going to get up and say, you know what, this is something that has to be fixed. However, he doesn't want to burden them too much, right? You go ahead and you give too much criticism, right? Now, I've never tried that. I've never gotten up in shul, right, and given a harsh talk. But odds are that if I give it for 15 minutes, I'm going to lose 3/4 of the crowd, and I don't mean just the sleeping, because that I've done in the past, but I mean people would walk out because no one enjoys. I don't like being criticized, right? I don't enjoy it, so why should I expect anyone else to be criticized? So this is a challenge that Moshe Rabbeinu has. So therefore, if you read carefully, he only is transmitting a message after giving them some words of encouragement. So for example, when does he give this message? Verse 4. When is he giving this message to them? That, listen guys, there are things you did wrong. Be aware of them and therefore work on self-improvement. So in verse 4 we are told that he only gives them this message, Acharei Hakoto, after they smite the nation of Sichon, the king of Emori, who settled in Heshbon. And after they dealt with the mighty Og, king of the Bashan, who was settled in Ashtaroth. Why is that spelled out here? It gives the nation encouragement, right? This is a nation that they were slaves in the past, they're in the wilderness, they are attacked by superpowers, right? And they survive. They were able to overcome. It gave them confidence. So Moshe Rabbeinu is very, very sensitive to the welfare of the emotional welfare of this nation. And so too, if we're going to just jump forward to verse 24. Verse 24, and this is the idea. A leader who understands that I have to be optimistic. It's very important. Every message you want to get across. Any message you want to give across. You have the 9 days. You want to remind the people about the significance of this era. You can't give a message that devastates people. There has to be optimism in it. Come Yamim Noraim. By the way, high holidays are around the corner, just for the record. Okay, can you believe it? 2 months, is that right? Av Elul, can you believe? I can't. You can't either. 2 months away from the high holiday season. So you have, it's important, it's significant. Now you make it too overwhelming, forget it. You don't want to deal with it. You have to balance things. Every message has to be balanced. So this is what Moshe Rabbeinu is going to teach us here in a very magnificent way, because after he shares with us the story of the great failing with the spies that returned with the negative report, so he shares with us that right afterwards, verse 28. So what happened after the spies came back? They cry. He says, you know what? We're stuck in the wilderness. But there was a small group in verse 28 that says that, a little bit further that. Hold on. He goes a little bit longer there. Verse 41. You with me now? So what happens in verse 41?
They complained.
Who?
They complained.
Well, this is actually the response. Chatanu Lashem, meaning right after they get the news that they failed with their reaction to the spies, they declare that, we got it wrong. But now, anachnu na'aleh, we're going to make our way up. Venilchamnu, and we're going to fight. K'chol asher tzivan Hashem Elokeinu, meaning, you're right, we had a lack of faith. We did not believe in your ability to take us into Eretz Yisrael. We're going to go ahead and change things. We're rolling up our sleeves and we're going to make our way to the land of Israel. And God in verse 42 through Moshe tells them, Lo ta'alu, don't do it. Meaning you lost your opportunity. I'm no longer protecting you. Do not make your way up to the mountain. Ki eneni bekir bechem. And if you try, you will fail. Verse 43, the warriors ignored the words of Moshe. Verse 44, who were they attacked by? Vayetzeh ha'emori hayoshev bahar hahu. There were Amorites that dwelled in the mountains, and they attacked you, and they pursued you, and they struck you like bees. Okay, now this is already described earlier in the text of Parshas Shlach. No new information here, right? That the nation, they decided they got knocked out. But when we start analyzing, or you're going to have to turn back to Parashat Shlach to that exact event, you will realize that there are a few problems here. So you're going to have to identify them and turn to Parashat Shlach on the page 800 and let's say around 808. Hold on, maybe 810. Yeah, 810. So page 810, when Moshe Rabbeinu again tells them in verse 42, don't go up. God's not with you. You will not succeed. And in verse 43, he spells out who's going to attack you in verse 43. So who is going to attack the people who are making their way without the protection of God Almighty? Who's there? Verse 43? Amaleki. And who indeed attacks them in verse 45?
And more.
The who? In verse 45? On page 810?
Oh, 810 back there.
Amalek. So, question number one.
It says Amori.
Here it says Amori, and there it says
Amalek.
Amalek. Like, same story. It didn't happen twice, okay? Don't try that. It's the same exact story. Number two, the bees, right? Did only bees start? Did bees start? There are bees that when they attack
Are
you,
they real
their
bees
stinger.
or that they swarmed them?
They swarm them like bees, but the comparison to bees appears here and not there. Now, you know that when it comes to, I think it's the honeybees, that when they place their stinger in someone, not on you, God forbid, and they pull it out and they lose their stinger, some of their intestines actually come out and they die. And the rabbis actually are telling us that in Devarim, the reason the attack against the children of Israel is compared to an attack of the bees is because God wants to convey this idea that when you are attacked, those who attack you are not going to survive. So there's something there, again, criticizing them, but at the same time, there is a message of hope that you, the nation of Israel, are beloved. Those who are going to attack you will not survive like bees. So that could be a way of explaining why here in Devarim, where it's a message of encouragement, why the bees are mentioned. But what we have to really deal with is the switch from Amaleki to Amori. So what attempt with the information provided? What do you want to suggest? Anyone? I'm looking at everyone, not one specific.
Don't we use a molek for anybody that attacks Bnei Israel? We use a molek.
Okay, so approach number one is that anyone that attacks Israel are Amalek. In other words, it is something that just as you could convert to Judaism, you could convert to become an Amaleki. Right? The Germans are Amalek. Right? The Nazis are Amalek. Why? Well, based on their values. So that's a possible explanation. But it could be, actually they were attacked by the Amaleki. But Amalek has always been a nation that has caused great and grave concern to the people of Israel. They come out of Egypt, a raw nation. When humanity is in awe of us, Amalek attacks. In Israel, they still exist as a nation, Amalek. Amalek is in existence because we know that they're going to have to deal with them in the days of Shaul and David. The nation of Israel, you want to scare them, you say Amalek. And here again, Parshas Shlach tells us, they were warned, don't do it. You're going to be attacked by Amalek. They ignore, they get attacked. However, right now, Moshe Rabbeinu needs to be very sensitive with this nation. he needs to encourage them, yes, you can. Remember that motto before, make America great again, all these worthless that are only good to sell hats and nothing else. But yes, you can, or yes, we can, and hope, right? That was the whole 8.5 years ago.
Hope and change.
Hope and change, yeah. Hope and change and Iran deal. So, yes, we can. That's what this nation needs at this time, right? And when you want to remind them that yes, you can, there is one nation that proves to them, yes, you can. Look, you managed against the Amorites led by Sichon, and by the term Amorites is a very general term because, for example, Avraham Avinu was told you're going to inherit this land of the Amorites. So there was a nation known as the Amori, but it was a term that was used for everyone in the region. Just as the nation of Canaan, it was one nation, but at times it was used to describe the whole region. So therefore, bottom line is, Moshe Rabbeinu knows very well, my message now has to be careful with the word of God, but at the same time, don't walk into battle with fear. Right? The attitude towards battle is going to be the key ingredient for success. So therefore, when he's sharing with them now the story of the people of Israel attacked, he doesn't want to mention Amaleki. He prefers a much more generic term, and this is a term that they are not afraid of because they dealt with the Emori. So therefore, in Devarim, when he's recalling these events where they were told don't, Vayetze in verse 42, Ha'emoria Yoshev Bahar, how in that mountain, the specific Amorites that settled in that mountain, and they attacked you. He avoided using Amalek, and rather he used
A generic term.
a generic term. And this is, again, Moshe Rabbeinu's sensitivity. For anyone who believes that, you read Moshe Rabbeinu's quote-unquote rebuke of the people, and is inspired to rebuke, right? If an educator, a teacher, a Rebbe, uses this as a guide for rebuke, he is making a big mistake because you have to read the details. And in the details you see the sensitivity that Moshe Rabbeinu has. What he is mentioning, what he is not mentioning, and what he is adjusting. He is reminding them of the areas of success. This is what we could be inspired by Moshe Rabbeinu. And this is a general understanding of the message of Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, one more little detail that I would like to focus on. So turn back to page 940, please. 940 in Devarim. This is okay. So we'll do something of the parsha. All this was an introduction, by the way. Page 940. So in verse 9, he tells them, I said to you at that time, Va'omar alechem ba'et ha'ih le'emor, lo ucha levadi setetchem. I cannot carry you alone.
But he said that to Hashem.
Moshe Rabbeinu.
But Moshe said to Hashem.
Moshe says to the people, listen, 39 years ago, I told you I no longer could do it alone.
Didn't he say that to Hashem?
He also said it to Hashem. Okay, that appears later, correct. And he explains why, because in verse 10, Hashem Elohekechem hir ba'etchem. He multiplied you. And you are a nation. In other words, if let's say, sometimes rabbis, not me, rabbis think they have, let's say, a congregant that's very, very easy and very, very nice to them. Other rabbis. So what they pray to God is that God could clone, that he would like to have a shul of 700 members. But he wants 700 members who are like that guy exactly, right? It doesn't work like that. Because the Jewish people, every person is like a star. You see the stars at night? And you could think, yeah, stars exactly like the other star. You know very well that that's a whole world out there. And when you interact with a Jewish person, every Jewish person is a whole world. And this is what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, that you've multiplied, but there are no clones. Every single person I'm interacting with is a whole new series of complexities. So therefore, you are like many stars. Now, is Moshe Rabbeinu really kvetching here? Not really. Because in the next verse he says, Hashem Elokei avotechem Yosef alechem kachem elef pamim. But I'm praying that there should be 1,000 times such challenges, as he promised. So here he's very optimistic. Now in verse 12 he faces the reality that they drove him absolutely nuts. In verse 12 he says that I cannot alone carry, right, your burdens, your quarrels. They drove him absolutely nuts. And here he needed some people to assist him. But the first part is more an optimistic statement that, you know what, you have multiplied, and you became like an awesome nation. Now, if you turn back to verse 9, there's one word that the verse would work well without. That is the last piece of work I'm putting upon you here. You're going to turn to verse 9, and you're going to tell me what word is really not necessary.
Alecha.
V'omar ba'etai. Well, he told them. Try it, let's go. Dun, dun, dun.
Levati.
Dun, 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 dun. Le'emor. Yes. What is this le'emor? V'omar alechem ba'etai. I told you, lo chal levadi sedetchem. Le'emor means to say over, right? To say over to who? To say over to who? Well, what is this to say over? So comes Rameir Simcha of Devinsk and he says that this message of the overwhelmed leader, that at the same time understand that this is a blessing, is an important message to future leaders and future prophets. In other words, this is a le'emor. Moshe Rabbeinu is telling them to tell their children that this is the proper attitude, to say this is incredible, right? That this is a challenge, but it is a challenge where you pray to God, we want it to continue. Yosef al Hashem alechem elef pa'amim. When you read about in Israel, the challenges of traffic, and the challenges of the price of real estate, and the challenges of nowhere to build. I mean, they do, or the fact that in the big cities, you can't live there, so they're starting to move to the north, to Tveria, to Elfula, right, to different locations. Do you realize the blessing we are talking about? In other words, we are overwhelmed. It is a challenge. There's no question. When someone has his whole mishpacha there, Bnei Barak, and Yerushalayim, and he has to go ahead and move to Afula, you can imagine that it's not something that's easy. But as a nation, we are supposed to step back and say, what a blessing. Look at our history. Look at our history of a desolate land. Study about Nachmanides coming to Yerushalayim and finding two Jews there who don't talk to one another. And when he needs a shul, all he does is he takes the dilapidated structure and he starts removing rubble. Think about that. Is that what you want as a God forbid. We are happy with what exists. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, and this is a message to the leader. When you are overwhelmed from calls, right, from issues that symbolize a nation that's alive and active and interested, be happy. Yosef Hashem, may this continue. This is the message, and this is our prayer, that may Klal Yisrael continue to have questions that symbolize our growth and how we are multiplying and how we are recovering like no other nations. They had an interview yesterday of some Yazidi woman who they are decimated what was done to them, and she said straight out that we turn to the history and to the Jews to be inspired, because there's something we were able to do in 7 decades that humanity has not seen. And we take this message, le'emor, we want to be busy. We want to be a nation that is doing good, institutions that are growing, we hope, right? That in Eretz Yisrael, because that's where our future is. And that's the message, and may we merit indeed to see a complete redemption from that message. Thank you so much for coming.
Amen.
We see you in September, God willing. And that's the end of the semester. Everyone gets an A. Okay? And